Thank you, all of you, for coming, especially those who, right now, are pro-fluoridation. Hopefully, when you leave, you will not be, even the ones with the silver hats on. When I was at school, I think the most important lesson I learned was from my Latin teacher when I was about 12 years old. He said, you know, the best definition of an educated person is someone who can entertain his or herself, entertain a friend, and entertain a new idea. Now, it's that last kicker, isn't it? Entertaining a new idea, which defines an open mind, which means that many people attending and even teaching at university are not educated because their minds are closed. Their minds are closed. And it means that some people who've never entered a university are highly educated because their minds have remained open. So I invite you, regardless of your current position, to listen carefully to the information that we have to share with you tonight. So I should be talking then about fluoride's risk to the brain and looking at the evidence for that. First up, a personal introduction. Most of it you've already heard from Russell. I'm a retired professor of chemistry. I specialized in environmental chemistry and toxicology, and I spent the last 23 years researching fluoride's toxicity and the dangers of water fluoridation. And this is an issue that I didn't want. When my wife asked me to look at it, I said, these people are crazy. They wear tin hats, and that was the prevailing attitude in the United States. It's a contrived attitude. They are brilliant, and we are, of course, stupid. That's very self-serving. Anyway, we did write this book. I co-authored the book, The Case Against Fluoride. And I do want to stress, I co-authored it. This was written by 3 people, and my authors were fantastic. James Beck, MD, and PhD in physics, and from Calgary, and Spedding Micklem, equivalent of a PhD from Oxford, professor of biology. So a retired professor of physics, chemistry, and biology wrote this book. Every single argument in this book is backed up with scientific evidence. And a few months after it was written, I was invited to go to the Ministry of Health in Wellington and present the arguments in this book. And when I got to the end, I said, we've done everything that you would expect from 3 scientists who are opposed to something. We've made the arguments totally transparent. Everything is documented. I said, now it's your turn. You get several of your bureaucrats to go through this book and give me a written response. Destroy our arguments if you can. And after 8 years, I received nothing. But we've had the Minister of Health going on television and chastising opponents of fluoridation of misrepresenting the literature. Well, if we misrepresented the literature, the time to do it was when we asked for a written response. That would have been the fair, the decent, the professional, the honest thing to have done. Talking about teams, here's my other team. That's my wife, Ellen, and that's my son, Michael. The 2 of them are just rocks on which our movement are built. And shortly, next year, I think Michael will achieve a very great victory in California. And tonight's team, it contains 2 of the brightest people I've ever met. Vyvyn Howard is a genius. I mean, this man plays the cellist. He's a conductor. He has his own software company. He's the president of the Royal Microscopy Society. I mean, and he's a farmer. He's everything. He's an amazing man. And he's got the best collection of jokes I've ever heard from any person. And Declan has got an incredible mind. It amazes me in 3 years how much of the fluoride literature he's been able to absorb and master. And you'll get an inkling of that tonight. So the outline of my talk, first of all, is fluoride an essential nutrient? How toxic is fluoride? Fluoride levels in mother's milk? Are children being overexposed to fluoride in fluoridated communities? Can fluoride damage other tissues? Can fluoride damage the brain? And can it lower IQ? I would try to answer all those questions. And Declan and Vyvyn, between them, are going to talk about the biochemical mechanisms whereby this might occur. How does fluoride interfere with the brain? What are the mechanisms? So I'm going to answer some of those questions now. Is fluoride an essential nutrient? Well, the answer is no. In order to demonstrate that something is an essential nutrient, you have to take animals, starve them of that suspected nutrient in their diet, and if it is a nutrient, they develop a disease. No one has ever developed a disease because of lack of fluoride. And of course, that includes dental disease. Dental disease is not caused by a lack of fluoride, it's caused by too much sugar and not enough dental care in those early years. So there's no such thing as fluoride deficiency. There's not one biochemical process in the body that requires fluoride to go properly. Not one. You can't find fluoride incorporated in anything except the hard tissues in the mineral calcium hydroxyapatite. And as far as fluoride in the teeth are concerned, topically, externally, the fluoride interacts with the enamel and makes it harder and more resistant to acid attack. That's the way it works. But as far as internally is concerned, it doesn't do us any good. There's no need to swallow it. And in fact, it causes harm. Even the promoters of fluoridation admit that it causes dental fluorosis, which is damaging of the enamel, the laying down of the enamel. And the gross assumption that's been made for 70 years is that whilst fluoride is damaging the enamel, it's not damaging any other tissue in the body, as if it had some mind of knowing where to go in the body. This is what the CDC, Oral Health Division, the big promoter of fluoridation, says about fluoride. Laboratory and epidemiologic research suggests that fluoride prevents dental caries predominantly after eruption of the tooth into the mouth, and its actions primarily are topical. When they admitted that, it should have been the end of fluoridation. Obviously, if it works topically, it's universally available in topical forms. There's no need to force it on people that don't want it, and there's no need to grossly expose every other tissue in the body to a known toxic substance. So how toxic is fluoride? Fluoride is incompatible with human biochemistry. It is harmful at very, very low levels. And if you want to see a summary of that, Barbier has this excellent review giving the molecular mechanisms of fluoride's toxicity. It's extremely complicated. If you start to look at all the mechanisms, all the plethora of ways that fluoride can damage biochemistry, it is extremely mind-boggling. And I've actually asked Declan to talk about this study. This is a study that came out August of this month, last month, by Chen. And he offers a possible biochemical mechanism for how fluoride damages neurodevelopment. And in that, he has a very interesting diagram. And you can see, if you're new to this kind of stuff, all these things, ERK, BDNF, TRKB, PSD95, SYN, it's very confusing to a non-scientist. And even someone like myself who loved biochemistry, in a few years, one becomes quickly out of date on the details. But hopefully Declan will help us. The level of fluoride in mother's milk was, for me, a big argument back in 1996. It's extremely low, 0.004 parts per million. And in effect, mother's milk is protecting the infant from fluoride exposure, and Vyvyn will have a little bit more to say about that. Vyvyn is an infant and fetal pathologist. We absolutely need him at this juncture, as you'll see. And what that means is that water fluoridation removes that protection from babies when mothers feed them formula made up with tap water from a fluoridated community. And when they do that, in New Zealand, where your level is on average 0.85 parts per million in New Zealand, you're giving that baby several hundred times more fluoride than nature intended. This is what Arvid Carlsson said. Arvid Carlson won the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 2000. He passed away a few weeks ago at the age of 93. But he led the campaign against fluoridation in Sweden. He said, one wonders what an increase in the exposure to fluoride, such as occurs in bottle-fed infants, may mean for the development of the brain and the other organs. 1978, how prophetic that is, you will see. So next question is, are children in fluoridated communities being overexposed to fluoride? Absolutely yes, and nobody in the dental profession can deny that, because the data is there from promoters themselves. The CDC in 2010 said that 41% of children aged 12 to 15 had some form of dental fluorosis. And don't forget, when H. Trenley Dean started this business in 1945, they thought at 1 part per million, only 10 or maybe 15% of children would get this condition in its very mild form. Run the clock forward to 2010, and 28.5% of kids have it in the very mild form, 8.6% in the mild form, where 50% of the enamel is impacted with these white opaque patches. And for 3.6% of children aged 12 to 15 in the United States have moderate or severe dental fluorosis, where 100% of the enamel is impacted. So this prediction that only 10 or 15% of the children would have this condition was a huge failure, an absolutely huge failure. Half of the equation was a huge failure. So can fluoride damage other tissues? Well, the best argument for that, who are seriously interested in the issue, is to read this report by the NRC in 2006. I was the only anti-fluoridation scientist who was asked to testify. I gave 45 minutes of my best to them in 2003. This is a 500-page report, 1,100 references. And it's really the Bible of toxicology, or at least as it was in 2006. They looked at effects on the musculoskeletal system, the reproductive system, the brain, the endocrine system, and yes, the gastrointestinal and genotoxicity and carcinogenicity. So you can look at that. There is no question that fluoride damages other tissues. No question at all. The question is, can fluoride, at the levels people are exposed to in fluoridated communities, can those levels damage? Can water fluoridation damage people's health? That is the key issue. That is the key debate. Not whether fluoride can damage it. It absolutely does. People's lives have been wrecked by fluoride. Millions of people's lives have been wrecked by fluoride around the world. Can fluoride damage the brain and lower IQ in children? And let me add there, can fluoride lower children of IQ at the levels, at the doses which are experienced in fluoridated communities? And the answer, as you will see, is yes. The NRC panel in 2006 said, it is apparent that fluorides have the ability to interfere with the functions of the brain. Now, that statement was made in 2006. They only had 5 IQ studies available at that time. Let's see what's happened since then. By 2010, when we wrote our book, there were 23 IQ studies. And the reason that those numbers jumped up is because we, the Fluoride Action Network, had about a dozen of the studies in Chinese translated into English. Otherwise, Western audiences did not know that there's an incredible amount of study being done in China on this issue. Now, all these studies, along with 100 animal studies, are referenced in our book and described in our book, the one I have mentioned. There are a few copies available here. In 2012, a team from Harvard, including Philippe Grandjean, who's one of the world's experts on mercury's neurotoxicity, published a meta-analysis of 27 IQ studies. These included 25 studies from China and 2 from Iran. It was published in the leading environmental health journal in the world, Environmental Health Perspectives. The Harvard team acknowledged what many people have also acknowledged, that these Chinese studies had weaknesses. Many of them didn't give us enough information about confounding variables, but some were pretty strong. But however, what they did stress is that results were remarkably consistent. Of these 27 studies, 26 of them showed that the IQ, the average IQ in the high fluoride village that they compared to the low fluoride village was lowered. And it was lowered by a quite significant amount, 7 IQ points. This is figure 2 of their paper. And if you look at the dates of the publications, they go from 89 to 2011. So over 22 years, many different research teams did these studies, 25 of them in China, 2 of them in Iran, and in various different parts of China. So despite this huge variation in time and space and research team personnel, the results, as you see in the center there, are remarkably consistent. Only one doesn't fit the same pattern as the others. Now, I want to draw your attention to that, what I've put in the green circle there, minus 0.45. Now, that's a very important number politically and scientifically. What it means is the average reduction in IQ for these 27 studies was 0.45 of 1 standard deviation. The standard deviation on the IQ curve is 15 IQ points. So minus 0.45 of 1 standard deviation is approximately 7 IQ points. That is essential for you to remember as we now look at a very influential statement, a research paper by 2 very, very influential people, Sir Peter Gluckman and Sir David Skegg, a former vice-chancellor of this university. Now, I don't know these people personally, and there's nothing personal about what I'm going to say. But their statement has outrageously misled the New Zealand public, decision makers, and the media. And here is the misleading statement. And the misleading part is about fluoride's ability to lower IQ. This is what they wrote. Recently, there have been a number of reports from China and other areas that have claimed an association between high fluoride levels and minimally, that's my emphasis, minimally reduced intelligence measured as IQ in children. The claimed shift of less than 1 IQ point suggests that this is likely to be a measurement or statistical artifact of no functional significance. Let's go back to that a moment. There is minus 0.45. That's what they're thinking, that it's minus 0.45 of 1 IQ point, less than 1 IQ point. But it isn't. It's minus 0.45. That's 7 IQ points. One hell of a difference between 0.45 of an IQ point and 0.45 of 1 standard deviation. Now, the FAN New Zealand was quick to point out to these authors that they'd made this mistake, and the mistake was based, by the way, it was contained in a press release which went out the time this paper was published. Have you heard enough, have you? Heard enough? Okay, all right. Okay, so if the mistake was made in a press release, but it was quickly pointed out to them, and Harvard University issued a correction. So it's in 2012. So it's amazing to me that in 2014 that Gluckman and Skegg, or whoever wrote this report that they sanctioned, could make the same mistake. I can only assume that they didn't actually read the paper that they were commenting on. Now, they've corrected the mistake, but their correction has made the situation worse as far as misleading the New Zealand media, decision makers, and the public. Now, you can see the correction here. They went from less than 1 IQ point to less than 1 standard deviation. Now, that's correct. Technically, that correction is accurate to a point. But they've corrected in a mistake that most people in New Zealand would not understand, right? How many people in the general public, how many newspaper editors, how many politicians know what a standard deviation is in the IQ curve? Very few, I would suggest to you. They should have indicated that this drop was 7 IQ points, not less than 1 standard deviation. Or to put it this way, they could have corrected it this way, less than 1 standard deviation, and then explain, in this case, a drop of 7 IQ points. By not making this correction clear, they wittingly or unwittingly, the people that orchestrated this whole thing, concealed the fact that their conclusion no longer follows from their premise. Okay, so let me explain what I mean there. If your claim shift of half an IQ point suggests that this is likely to be a measurement or statistical artifact of no functional significance, that might apply to half an IQ point, right? But does it apply to 7 IQ points, a drop? So if you put in the correction less than 7, a claim shift of 7 IQ points suggests that this is likely to be a measurement of statistical artifact of no functional significance. Come on. That is misleading the New Zealand people. And I've asked Vyvyn to explain why a loss of 5 IQ points, let alone 7, has a huge functional significance. Not no functional significance, but a huge functional significance at the population level. Now, by 2016, there were now 55 human studies showing a lowering of IQ in high fluoride villages. 49 out of 55 showed a lowering. And one of the 6 that didn't was from New Zealand. This is the study from Dunedin by Broadbent and others. Now, the Dunedin study is world famous. It's a high-quality study of archive materials and so on. Unfortunately, Broadbent's study was not high quality, certainly not world-class, as he claimed on television. Now, the problem with Broadbent's study, he had vastly more people in the exposed community than in the unexposed community, the non-fluoridated community. 991 in the fluoridated area and only 99 in the non-fluoridated. Broadbent did not consider total fluoride exposure. He only looked at fluoride in the water. In New Zealand, during the 1970s, when the studied children were young, many families were giving their children fluoride supplements. And I think about a third of those 99, that small control group, was getting fluoride supplements. Others have estimated the total fluoride intake and have concluded that the study had insufficient power to detect an effect. And so it's not surprising that they found no difference in IQ. Furthermore, the authors did not control for several important confounders like lead, mother's IQ, rural and urban, and manganese. And what's so extraordinary about that is the opening of this paper is chastising the Chinese studies for lacking control factors, but when they had the data, they didn't use the control, didn't control for them either. But, and Declan will have more to say about this, but really, the current events have made this point mute. For I believe that Broadbent comes nowhere near dismissing all the other 49 studies which shows an effect. But even so, it's moot, because on September the 19th, 2017, we got a bombshell. We got a bombshell in this whole discussion. This is the announcement of the bombshell from the University of Toronto. What's new? Higher levels of fluoride in urine associated with lower intelligence in children. Here is the paper. It's a paper by Bashash et al. This is the most important name right now in this whole discussion. Prenatal fluoride exposure and cognitive outcomes in children at 4 and 6 to 12 years of age in Mexico. I want to talk more about this study because it's so important. It deals with every criticism that's been leveled about the Chinese studies, the Iranian studies, the Indian studies, and all the other studies. First of all, it's a 12-year study. It's a multi-million-dollar funded study. It was part of the 25-year Element program directed by Howard Hugh at the University of Toronto. It was funded by the US government, by agencies that promote fluoridation, like the National Institutes of Health, like the Environmental Protection Agency. The authors came from prestigious universities throughout the continent, from Canada, from America, from Mexico. The researchers are highly experienced. They produced amongst them 50 papers dealing with cognitive effects related to other environmental neurotoxicants like lead and mercury. So these people knew exactly what they were doing. They controlled for everything under the sun. And the most important thing is that they showed that the critical period of exposure to fluoride was during fetal development. Oh, does that make this more serious? You know, if you have a safe dose of fluoride for adults, you know that the safer dose is going to be lower for children and lower for babies and even lower for the fetus. And the way we compare that is we have to take into account body weight. You divide the dose which causes harm in adults and you divide by the adult's body weight. But when you get down to fetuses, what do you think the body weight of a fetus in the first trimester is? We're talking about possibly astronomical problems compared to an adult. Vyvyn, being a fetal expert, infant and fetal expert, will have more to say about this. So what do? They examined 300 mother-offspring pairs. The mother's exposure to fluoride during pregnancy was determined by analyzing their urine. Now that's important. Analyzing the fluoride in the urine takes out the issue of the source of fluoride. We don't care if those women got fluoride from toothpaste, from water, from salt, from food, from pesticides. It doesn't matter because the total amount of fluoride is measured by what is in their urine, which means you can compare that study with any community in the world. It doesn't have to relate to the source. The cognitive function of the women's offspring was measured at age 4 and again at 6 to 12. And what they found was for every milligram per liter increase in the mother's urine levels, the children lost an average of 5 to 6 IQ points. That was the association. Now, a 1 milligram per liter difference in urine fluoride would be roughly the difference for a pregnant woman between living in a fluoridated area in the United States and a non-fluoridated area. So we're looking at doses at exactly what our population is exposed to. Exactly. And in fact, if you want it more exact, the levels in North Palmerston were exactly the same as these doses in the pregnant women, the exposure in the urine levels. Now, I want you to notice also, all the other studies have compared one community with another community. These are the weakest epidemiological studies. They're ecological, they're geographically based, they're community-based. This study is individually based. The levels of the urine were measured for each individual. And for each individual's child, they were measured individually. This is a very, very strong study. There's the scatter diagram for the equivalent of IQ at the age of 4 on the left-hand axis, and the bottom axis is the prenatal maternal urine fluoride levels. And why the scatter? Some promoters of fluoridation have pointed the scatter and said, oh, you know, fluoride contribution is so small. No. This scatter is exactly the same that you would get with lead or mercury or any other neurotoxin because of genetics. If you look at our whole population, you get a huge variation in IQ. Huge scatter. But the interesting thing is that, and that genetics explains 80% At least 80% of that scatter is explained by genetics, and it's the other 20%. How much of the other 20% is explained by fluoride? And the answer is about 3 to 4%. About 3 to 4% of the rest is explained by 3 to 4% out of 20% is explained by fluoride. And we've simplified the diagram somewhat, but that's the range of the levels, maternal urine fluoride levels in the USA. It's between 0.6 and 1.5. And if you plot that on the same graph, you see that's equivalent to a loss of 6 IQ points. The findings were highly statistically significant and were undiminished even after controlling for all the many potential co-founders. And for the testing at age 4, there was no lower threshold found. This relationship went right down to 0.2 parts per million in the mother's urine. Now, let's read their conclusion. In this study, higher levels of maternal urinary fluoride during pregnancy, a proxy for prenatal exposure, that are in the range of levels of exposure in other general population samples of pregnant women as well as non-pregnant adults, were associated with lower scores on tests of cognitive function in the offspring at 4 and 6 to 12 years of age. If you want to read more about the study, we've made it all available, the actual study itself, the newspaper comments, etc., on our webpage, fluoridealert.org. This is what the ADA said 1 or 2 minutes after the study was publicly released. Obviously, they got a pre-copy. What do they say? The ADA, American Dental Association, examined a study in environmental health perspectives based on fluoride intake in Mexico and concludes the findings are not applicable to the United States. The ADA continues to endorse fluoridation of public water as the most effective public health measure to prevent tooth decay. That is not a scientific statement. That is simply propaganda, public relations, and it gives you an idea that the ADA has as much understanding of science as a bicycle shop. Dr. Howard Hugh, the director of this program, the Element program, had this to say. This is a very rigorous epidemiological study. You just can't deny it. It directly relates to whether fluoride is a risk for neurodevelopment of children. So to say it has no relevance to the folks in the US seems disingenuous. As far as relating BASHAS to New Zealand, I would draw your attention to the fact that you got exactly the same range of fluoride in pregnant women's urine in Palmerston North as you have in Mexico City. And if you want to check that out, here's the conference presentation on which that's based, Brow and others from 2015. Now, recently, the promoters have had a field day with an animal study, not a human study, an animal study done by the National Toxicology Program. And they exposed rats to fluoride, did all kinds of neurochemical testing, neurobehavior, and so on, and concluded that there was no evidence that these animals were harmed by fluoride, no damage to the brain at all. So, and the promoters have now used this single animal study to negate all the other animal studies. Now, before you believe that, Declan would be talking about the animal that they used. This hooded rat seems to be the most resistant of the rats. It's not the one that's typically used. And he has some other things to say about it. Now, I then want to conclude then by summarizing the weight of evidence that fluoride is neurotoxic and lowers IQ in children. There are over 300 animal and human studies indicating that fluoride can damage the brain and has the potential to lower IQ in children. There are 52 IQ studies, and you can find those on our webpage, all listed or described. There are over 100 animal studies which shows that fluoride can cause biochemical changes in the brain. 45 out of 47 animal studies shows that rodents, when exposed to fluoride, it changes their ability or decreases their ability to learn, to memorize. The 52 IQ studies. Then there's 12 other studies which deal with other cognitive effects, not necessarily measured by IQ tests. And the 3 human studies which looked of harm to the fetal brain from China. And again, those are all listed on our webpage and discussed. The conclusion. For any country to continue fluoridation with all these studies, including a US government-funded study, on the table is reckless. And I conclude that the risks to the brain during fetal and infant development far, far outweigh any small, if any, benefit from ingestion of fluoride during fetal development. Is there any study out there that shows that a fetus being exposed to fluoride reduces tooth decay at some later time in life? I don't think so. So my recommendation to the University of Otago, the students that are here, the professors are here, thank you again for coming, is follow your motto, sapere aude, dare to be wise. I think in this context, I would take it one step further. Dare to be wise and challenge authority. We've gone beyond Galileo in most universities. What we know in science is not based any longer on belief systems, but what is in the literature. I urge you to read that literature with an open mind, and when you do so, you will take off your hats. And hopefully before you graduate and get another hat. And once you've looked at the literature with an open mind, and not just being seduced by what, oh, by the way, I meant to ask you, can you give me my book for a second? Did any of your professors suggest to you that you might read the other side of this story? Has the dental Department of Dentistry or Neuroscience, has anybody suggested that you get the other side of the story on fluoridation? Is this a set book? Is this a set book in any dental school that you know of in any fluoridated community? You know, it appalls me as a former professor, where I was always obliged to give both sides of controversial issues, that this issue seems to go by. Generation and generation of dental students only get one side of the story. They don't get the other side. They don't get what you're going to hear tonight. And it's very sad and it's very dangerous on a professional level and on a democratic and governmental level, when your future experts in a discipline are only getting one side of a controversial story, and I have to end at that point. Thank you.